Materials used in this presentation are period in nature and used for educational purposes only. Furthermore, when videos are used, they are utilized in conjunction with the photographs to produce continuity, in some instances are composites, and fall within the purview of the fair use doctrine of United States copyright laws. Attribution is given where required.
Welcome to the True Crime Man's Dark Imagination YouTube channel, your source for interesting and factual crime. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can stay up to date on any future programs.
William Shakespeare, the pearl of English literature, wrote in Othello, quote, "O beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster, which doth mock the meat it feeds on." End quote. Jealousy causes human behavior to morph into abnormal behavior. Take, for instance, the case we are profiling in this episode. A perceived virginal young woman portrayed as the victim of a diabolical seduction, a spoiled, rich young man who sees in the young girl the love of his life and will go to the far ends of the earth of being known as her protector, and an older man accused of playing the part of the rich, powerful, popular seducer. It is truly a tragic case that was driven through the press and demonstrated the undeniable power of money and influence.
On June 28, 1906, at approximately 8 a.m., mourners arrived at a large prominent house located on 21st Street, facing Gramercy Park in New York City. Once mourners arrived, they paid their respects to the prominent man lying in the casket of the parlor of the residence. When the multitudes of people concluded their mourning, a hearse and 4 carriages drew up before the house, and the close relatives and friends mounted the carriages for the journey to his interment. A funeral mass was said at the Little Episcopal Church at St. James, Long Island. After the burial, the mourners dispersed. As the causes of his death remained a mystery, some still had questions in their minds as to why this venerated artist had to die, to be dispatched in public in front of many witnesses. After all, the deceased contributed greatly to the metropolitan landscape of New York City. In fact, he designed the original Madison Square Garden that contained a theater and restaurant on the top floor where influential New Yorkers attended performances and hobnobbed with their class. The murder of Stanford White, architect and humanitarian, raised questions as to the equitable nature of the justice system. But his demise also opened the door to a dark world of perversion, seduction, and period deviance. The central figure in White's death set her sights on becoming an actress and made her way to New York City at the age of 15 in December of 1900. She began as a model in Pennsylvania, where her career seemed to spell bigger and better things. Within a few days of arriving in the city, a renowned local artist, James Carroll Beckwith, saw the young girl and determined that she fit the mold of the, quote, perfectly formed nymph, end quote, and requested that she pose for him twice a week in order for the artist to complete a portrait of the young girl. Soon after posing for Beckwith, the young girl, Evelyn Nesbit, saw her services in great demand as she soon appeared on the covers of postcards and magazines. Nesbit even appeared on Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, Harper's Bazaar, and Ladies' Home Journal. Most historians of the period branded Evelyn as the first pin-up girl of the 20th century. Although she had no formal training as an actress, Nesbit won a role in the musical of Florodora in 1901. At one of these performances of the risque musical, Evelyn caught the eye of one of the most influential men in New York City at the time, Stanford White. White acted like a smitten teenager whenever he attended a performance in which Evelyn appeared. What the rest of New York did not know is that White exhibited an almost insatiable appetite for young girls and indiscriminate intercourse with those young girls. White, along with other men his age at the time, formed an organization in 1887 known as the, quote, Sewer Club, end quote, where they brought young women, and sometimes young boys, to a secluded, out-of-the-way place within the city to indulge in their fantasies of whatever suited their fancy. A man as powerful and wealthy as White attracted the most beautiful young girls and boys to the lair of decadence. White's infatuation with Evelyn grew steadily, and the 46-year-old White arranged with another chorus girl who was quite intimate with Evelyn to have the stunning teenager attend a, quote, society luncheon, end quote. It turned out the luncheon to be just a lunch with 4 people held at White's West 24th Street apartment. It was there, after the luncheon, that White introduced Evelyn to the, quote, red velvet swing, end quote, a seemingly harmless device hanging from the ceiling of White's second floor of the apartment. After several prodding suggestions from the middle-aged architect to Evelyn to try the swing, she relented. Over the course of several months, White gained the confidence of Evelyn's mother so that the young girl spent more time with him. When Evelyn first met White, she considered him, quote, terribly old, end quote, but then grew to admire his charming demeanor and what can only be described as his, quote, boundless playfulness. Mrs. Nesbit believed White to be harmless and only wanted to cultivate a paternal relationship with her daughter. Over time, though, Mrs. Nesbit allowed her teenage daughter to attend numerous parties and luncheons where White was the host. White softened the mother with lavish gifts and began calling him, quote, Stanny, end quote, mentioning him to her friends that White became their, quote, benefactor, end quote. Approximately 2 months after solidifying his friendship with Evelyn's mother, White offered to pay all expenses for Mrs. Nesbit to take a trip to her home in Pittsburgh. Evelyn's mother stated she would make the trip on the condition that Evelyn saw no one but White during her absence. While Mrs. Nesbit traveled to Pittsburgh, White sent a cab for Evelyn at the residence where she stayed. Told there would be a cocktail party, when Evelyn arrived at White's apartment, she noticed no other guests there but her. White explained all the other guests declined to attend and they would have to make do with just them two. According to the later account Evelyn rendered, she drank a lot of champagne and passed out. When she awoke, Evelyn laid nude in a bed covered by silk sheets with a canopied mirror. The telltale sign of her deflowering appeared on her inner thigh. White was reported to have given Evelyn a kimono and told her, quote, don't cry, kittens. It's all over. Now you belong to me, end quote. For several days after that, Evelyn bounced between anger and confusion, as she could not decipher how a man she respected and admired could have done this to her. In any case, with no other suitors or men willing to take care of her, she stayed with White for some time, and any further appearances on the red velvet swing would entail Evelyn's nudity. White showered the young girl with expensive gifts such as pearl necklaces, 3 diamond rings, and a set of fox furs. In August of 1902, Evelyn met a young sketch artist at one of the lavish parties thrown by White. The artist, John Barrymore, the future celebrated actor, waited until White left New York City for a fishing trip in Canada. Since the architect would be out of town for 2 weeks, Barrymore made his move for Evelyn. When Mrs. Nesbit found out about the budding relationship between her daughter and Barrymore, she notified White almost immediately and implored him to intervene to end the relationship. When White intervened, Evelyn faced animus from 2 different directions and reluctantly agreed to attend a boarding school in New Jersey. After Florodora ran its course, Evelyn won a part in another musical, Wild Irish Rose. After one of her performances in that work, Evelyn received flowers, letters, and offers of large gifts from a man calling himself, quote, Mr. Monroe, end quote. Monroe asked Evelyn to accompany him to dinners and other parties, but she politely declined his advances. The man calling himself Mr. Monroe was, in fact, Harry K. Thaw, the millionaire playboy from Pittsburgh. Thaw sought Evelyn's affections due to his infatuation with the young girl, and also that he hated Stanford White, and the affair between Evelyn and White became public knowledge. Thaw considered White to be a, quote, ravisher of young girls, end quote, and White kept Thaw from joining various clubs in the city. Additionally, Thaw desired more than anything to become Evelyn's, quote, knight in shining armor, end quote, to protect her from the brutish White. Thaw finally arranged a meeting with Evelyn through an intermediary, and according to Evelyn's later accounts, once Thaw finally got his wish, he knelt before Evelyn, kissed the hem of her dress, and stated that Evelyn was the most beautiful girl in the city of New York. Thaw finally revealed that he came from a very wealthy family, but Evelyn sensed something strange with the young man who strived to be her suitor. Thaw pursued Evelyn with a reckless abandon. In 1903, at the end of the term for her boarding school, Evelyn developed appendicitis and needed life-saving surgery. Thaw rushed the young girl to the hospital and held her hand while she was there, professing his love for Evelyn. When she recovered, Evelyn reluctantly agreed to go to Europe with Thaw and his mother, a trip that Evelyn later regretted. In a Paris hotel room, at Thaw's urging after he plied her with a lot of champagne, Evelyn related what White did to her. When Thaw listened to every gory and sordid detail, he, according to Evelyn, quote, shuddered, whimpered, and then went limp, end quote. Thaw kept whispering, quote, oh God, poor child, end quote. Harry K. Thaw was the type of personality that could not let bygones be bygones, and the memory of the woman he now loved being ravaged by an older man who stifled the young man's social standing festered within the young millionaire's mind. Subsequent to Mrs. Thaw leaving the couple in Europe and returning to the United States, Thaw and Evelyn found themselves in a rented castle in Austria. Evelyn described the castle in her memoirs as
a huge Gothic nightmare of cold stones and dimly lit, drafty passageways, grimmer than anything in the Grimm brothers' tales. Evelyn Nesbit.
On the first night in the castle, Evelyn fell asleep and was awakened by a naked and seething Thaw. He threw aside the covers and began abusing her with a riding crop. Eventually, Thaw forced Evelyn into a sexual encounter. In the eyes of those who knew the truth, Thaw's behavior mirrored that of White's in this instance. Although Thaw saw himself as Evelyn's sole protector, both men viewed the young girl as a possession to be owned. After this incident, and upon their return to the United States, on April 5, 1906, Evelyn and Harry Thaw were married in a private ceremony in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Evelyn then moved into the Thaw mansion, which could only be described as, quote, large and depressing, end quote, in Pittsburgh. What can only be a bird in a gilded cage, Evelyn lived a life of restricted luxury, resembling a sex slave with no escape. In the spring of 1906, Thaw started arrangements to schedule a European trip for he and Evelyn, and planned to spend a week in New York prior to heading across the Atlantic. The ship was set to sail on June 28th. On June 25, 1906, at approximately 6 p.m., Evelyn left her hotel suite on Fifth Avenue and met her husband at a local bar where they had drinks. Thaw had been there for quite some time and already consumed 3 alcoholic beverages. Thaw paid the $3 tab with a $100 bill, and then the couple headed off to Café Martin. As the Thaws enjoyed their dinner, Stanford White walked in with his son. Evelyn stated that a cold chill ran down her spine as he walked past the table. Considering the city heat, true fear embraced the young girl. Harry Thaw did not notice White's presence. Evelyn wrote a small note to Thaw informing him of White's presence. Thaw uncharacteristically did not lose his temper at first. As the couple left the restaurant and Thaw put on a straw hat, he cracked the brim in anger. Thaw then announced that he had tickets to a performance of Mam'zelle Champagne at the dinner theater atop Madison Square Garden later that evening. During the performance, Thaw learned that White would be there for the play. Later witnesses remembered once Thaw learned that his nemesis would be there, he, quote, paced the theater's lobby like a caged tiger, end quote. Evelyn realized what would happen if a confrontation ensued between Thaw and White, and very politely asked Thaw if they could leave. Evelyn and Thaw were part of a group of 4 people, and when they got to the elevator before leaving, 3 of them noticed Thaw had slipped away. The next thing the party knew, gunshots rang out. Evelyn knew immediately what happened. Thaw slipped away from his party as they were leaving and made his way to White's table, some 5 rows away from the stage. Thaw produced a revolver and confronted White. From 12 feet away, Thaw fired the first shot, which hit White in the head, killing him instantly. Thaw drew closer to White and fired the last 2 shots from approximately 2 to 3 feet away, striking White again in the head and the left shoulder. Once Thaw fired the last shot, he uttered,
"I did it because he ruined my wife. He had it coming to him. He took advantage of her and deserted her."
After the shooting and Thaw's proclamation, chaos ensued throughout the theater where herds of people made their way to the exits. The stage manager yelled that the show should continue and ordered the band to continue playing. At the moment of the shooting, Evelyn knew her husband had done something horrific. Police officers summoned very quickly arrested Thaw immediately. As they led the murderer away, Evelyn stated to her husband, quote, "Look at the fix you are in," end quote. Thaw replied, quote, "It's all right, dear. I have probably saved your life," end quote. On June 26, 1906, at approximately 3 a.m., authorities charged Harry K. Thaw with the murder of Stanford White and escorted him from the station house across the Bridge of Sighs to the Tombs, the city prison of New York City. In formulating a strategy to prosecute Thaw, New York District Attorney William T. Jerome, the combative prosecutor, sought to have Thaw deemed insane and sent to an asylum to save the state of New York some money. Thaw's original attorney, Louis Delfield, thought this to be a great idea. Why would a sane man literally execute the alleged abuser of his wife in front of 1,000 witnesses? Thaw would not even consider it and labeled Delfield a traitor. Thaw fired his attorney and hired another attorney. Thaw hoped to be put on the stand at trial and expose what he called, quote, "that set of perverts," end quote. In late January of 1907, jury selection began, and on February 4, 1907, opening statements began in the case of the State of New York versus Harry Kendall Thaw. At the start of the trial, Thaw realized that if he did not plead insanity, he could seriously face the electric chair in the murder of Stanford White. On February 7, 1907, Evelyn Nesbit Thaw took the stand and related the horrible events that transpired after she met Stanford White. On the stand, Evelyn stated,
He made me swear that I would never tell my mother about it. He said there was no use in talking, and the greatest thing in the world was not to get found out.
Evelyn responded when asked if Thaw got agitated when she related the details of what transpired between her and White.
Yes, he was excited and walked up and down the room. We sat up all night. He said it was not my fault, that no one could blame me, and that I was only an unfortunate girl, and that he didn't think any less of me. He would marry me anyway.
The defense wanted to admit a letter that Evelyn wrote to Thaw explaining the incidents that occurred between her and White. D.A. Jerome objected, but by the afternoon session, the letter was admitted into evidence, thus substantiating Evelyn's testimony in front of the court. Evelyn also stipulated that White tried to poison her against Thaw and keep her from Thaw's advances. By the middle of February, the gallery heard the grotesque story of a man who made advances and took advantage of a young girl half his age. The defense invoked a supplemental defense to Thaw's actions, entailing an uncodified law known as the, quote, unwritten law, end quote. The unwritten law applied predominantly to women who were wronged by their paramours. At the turn of the 20th century, the law was used as a defense of many women who murdered their paramours. If it worked for the women, the defense argued, it can work for Harry K. Thaw. But theoretically, the law only applied when in infidelity situations and not just the smoldering jealousy of a man proven to be abusive as well. During the course of the Thaw trial, the defense demonized the victim, Stanford White, in an attempt to win an acquittal for their client. Finally, in April of 1907, D.M. Delmas, defense attorney for Thaw, made a 2.5-hour closing statement to the case. Delmas appealed to chivalry when he stated, "The man who had brooded on this subject for 3 years, who had pictures of dreadful horrors haunting him by day and in the stillness of the night, could not be human to retain the calmness of reason. Delmas concluded by asking the jurors to put themselves in Thaw's place. Would they have not defended the honor of the woman they loved in such a way? Later in the day of April 12, 1907, the jury deliberated but could not reach a verdict in the case of the state of New York versus Harry K. Thaw. With the announcement of the verdict, Harry Thaw appeared unaffected. Police escorts brought the defendant back to the Tombs, and D.A. Jerome, determined to see Thaw prosecuted, vowed that another trial for the murder of Stanford White would be forthcoming. The second trial occurred in the mid to latter part of January 1908. Thaw's defense attorneys claimed Thaw insane when he committed the murder, diminished capacity. After 25 hours after being given their charges, the jury found Thaw not guilty by diminished capacity. Thaw would later be sentenced to the Madison Asylum for the Criminally Insane and would remain there until judged appropriate to return to society. Although Thaw escaped any real justice, the stigma of murderer did not necessarily stain his reputation any. Most believe that Evelyn's testimony at the second trial proved vindicating to her husband. In fact, later in her life, Evelyn admitted that her mother-in-law, Mrs. Thaw, offered Evelyn a divorce and $1 million if she testified at the second trial that Stanford White raped her. Evelyn eventually got her divorce, but the $1 million never materialized. Thaw stayed at the Madison until 1913, when another court determined him sane. Upon his release, Thaw went to Canada, but authorities extradited him back to the United States. Another sanity trial found him sane in 1915. Thaw's life continued without much incident until 1916. Thaw invited a young boy by the name of Frederick G. Gump Jr. to New York to act as Thaw's protege. The young man traveled from Kansas City, Missouri to New York in order to take the opportunity. A period newspaper described the young man as, quote, "He was physically a perfect specimen of strong young manhood," end quote. Gump's description of the harrowing incident incited many regarding the cruelty Thaw exhibited toward the young man. Once Thaw locked the boy in a suite at the McAlpin Hotel in New York City, Thaw began the evening with some small conversation that seemed to impress Gump. Gump then retired to take a bath. Thaw peeked into the bathroom twice while the young man bathed. On the third time, Gump stood up in the tub and Thaw grabbed the boy's hand and yanked him into the hotel room. Thaw beat the young man with a series of whips, and Gump fought him for over an hour to get the older man to stop. As the boy struggled, Thaw continued to beat the boy. When Gump lost the strength to resist Thaw's beating, Gump begged Thaw to stop. Thaw then replied, quote, "Not until you are my slave," end quote. The subsequent rendition of the events of what happened sickened many people. Eventually, after a horrific night of abuse, Gump escaped the hotel room. A later physical examination of the young boy revealed the extent of the abuse. At the trial for this offense, the jury found Thaw insane and sentenced him, again, to an insane asylum. Authorities released Thaw after he spent 7 years in the facility. He died in 1947 from a heart attack and is buried in the Allegheny Cemetery of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Evelyn Nesbit later went on to marry a dance instructor, Jack Clifford, who left her in 1918 but did not divorce her until 1933. Later in Evelyn's life, approximately 6 years after the second trial, Evelyn sought spousal support for her 6-year-old son that she claimed Thaw as the father. What she didn't rely on was that someone came forward and claimed paternity at the time. Therefore, any claim that Evelyn may have had on the Thaw fortune dried up with the father's admission. In 1955, Hollywood made a movie about Evelyn entitled The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing. The producers took a great deal of license to produce a viewership. Joan Collins played the lead role, with Farley Granger as Thaw and Ray Milland as the older Stanford White. Evelyn Nesbit died in a nursing home in Santa Monica, California on January 17, 1967, at the age of 82.
No one at the time of the trials believed that Harry K. Thaw would do any real time for the murder of Stanford White. Did Evelyn Nesbit drive Harry K. Thaw, a millionaire playboy, mama's boy, to murder someone who shamed her and her mother? It is blatantly obvious that Thaw was an unstable man who could not let go of the past. Granted, White may have been portrayed as what we term, quote, a dirty old man, end quote. But did he deserve to be murdered in the manner that Thaw chose? Was Thaw's anger more because White may have been a more successful man in an upper-crust society that Thaw strived to join? The Thaw family was wealthy beyond anyone's imagination at the time. Certainly, money was not the object, but reputation was. Or was it merely just plain old murderous jealousy? Until next time.
Welcome to the True Crime Man's Dark Imagination YouTube channel, your source for interesting and factual crime. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can stay up to date on any future programs.